I get it right before I get it wrong. I've been fucking up. I think we're good. Let's see. Wait. Before I get it wrong. Nope. Now we're good. Okay.
Hey, look at that. Split screen.
Yeah. All right. Go. Wait. Don't go. Go.
The last day will be a glorious one, filled with things that I love, like spend time with my son, read my favorite poems, listen to music the whole day, dance with my mother who hated dancing, tell my sister I love her and I'm proud of her, call everyone I've cared about, and I thank them for the years of friendship. I tell people on the street that they're beautiful, and that compliment is free. Nothing in New York is free anymore. Ride a train, ride a bike, ride a boat, go to the tallest building and scream beautiful things like I love you, and maybe someone will respond. I'll fight for my independence, paint murals of my heroes across my heart. Betances, Neruda, Albizu, Che, King, Calo, Dali, Miro, Miles, Malcolm, Lorca, de Burgos, Nin, Lenin, Hendrix, Bolivar, Martí, Ostos, Toussaint, Zapata, Zappa, Baraka, Ginsburg, Jaco, Coltrane, Cobain, Basquiat, and Garcia Marquez. And I thank them for their art. And I learned how to live on my feet and fly in my dreams. And I only kneel when I feel thankful. And I talk to the universe when I feel no one is listening. And I apologize to those I should apologize to. And the rest I learned that they're still not worthy. I speak to my father who's been dead for years. It's not the first time. But I tell him about my trips to Puerto Rico and how good the Yankees are doing and how I think he would have been proud. I revisit all the catalysts of my life and I remember and reenact them, and I see the young versions of myself, wild, stupid, rambunctious, ego-driven, hyper-sugared, up all night, graffiti sprayed and Broadway made, and I write my name to honor the past. And I thank those moments for being a foundational block for right now. And I think of all the cities and countries I visited: Puerto Rico, Cuba, London, St. John, Amsterdam, Brussels, Barcelona, Toronto, LA, Versailles, DC, Chicago, Detroit, Montreal, Calexico, Philadelphia, Oakland, Albuquerque, Atlantic City, Sacramento, St. Thomas, Miami, San Diego, Brixton, Berkeley, Providence, Tortola, Virgin Gorda, Rotterdam, Manchester, Boston, Berlin, Rome, Paris, and San Francisco. And I visit all the houses my son has lived in, and I thank them for keeping him safe. Then I take a walk around the city that I love and hate, and I eat pizza from Patsy's in Spanish Harlem, drink sangria from Camaradas. Then I go home to the only place I've ever considered home, on the Grand Concourse, with a memory in every splice of hardwood floor. And I bring down the paintings, I pack up the books, I put the guitars away, I sweep the living room, I open my old black chest that has all the journals I've ever written in, and I take them out. And I see how erratic my handwriting was. And someone once said it looks like a sociopath's handwriting. But I've never believed in a diagnosis given by a doctor who was paid by Medicaid. Then I read the first poem I wrote. It was called Life. And I read it to myself and I see how ironic it was that this 17-year-old was trying to tackle something so massive as life. And I don't blame him. He had nothing then. He probably thought he would never achieve anything, go anywhere, be anyone, love anything, love anyone, or be loved. And then I see the progression through the years. And then I go to the bedroom window, the one that my son and I both look out, with the big sky across the street over the abandoned church. And I watch the sunset. And I'll say, if today's my last day, damn, I was a lucky bastard, wasn't I?
God damn. All right. I love that. Yeah, in many ways, you're a man after my own, a poet after my own heart, because you're really good at the name drop poem. Like at the creating the succession of names one after another, right?
Yeah, list poems get it, to get it in.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of a lost art in many ways. And people still do it, but very few people do it well. Very few people do it well where it actually makes sense. because sometimes people just like all of a sudden they burst into the names and it has nothing to do with what the hell's going on. But just in terms of your craft, I really did appreciate that. I was listening to it. It's a beautiful, moving poem about growing old or growing into something. But just in terms of the craft, I'm a big fan of that.
Thank you. Do you know the thing is that poem was probably maybe the first or second poem I wrote for that collection, and I wrote it after I found out a professor, like a really good friend of mine, had passed away from a brain aneurysm.
Oh my
And
god.
aneurysms, you can't really stop that. Like it happens,
Yeah.
that's it. Like it's rare that you survive a brain aneurysm and are somewhat functional afterwards. And after that happened, um, I just thought about it, right? Like the the tragic immediacy of that kind of death, where um, you may or may not time you may not have time to really do whatever you want to do, and you know, like I'm grateful for this life that I've lived, and poetry has had such a big part of it. It is the foundation of what I've done in my life, and poetry has been most of it. And those things, like I don't take them for granted. Like I could be from any city. I could be from LA, I could be from Chicago, I could be from Miami or DC. Um, but if poetry is still the factor in my life, then I still think that I do the things that I want to do, and I'm completely grateful for it.
Yeah, yeah. Also, you mentioned a number of cities that you traveled through. Can you?
Yeah, again, like you could be, some random kid from the Bronx, some random Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx, some random Chicano from East LA, some Mexican from Chicago, but when you give any kind of craft the amount of love and commitment to it, it can open some of those doors. Not all those cities were poetry based, but a lot of them were. Like I don't really take vacations at this point. I
Yeah,
haven't
yeah,
taken a vacation in a long time. Um, but most of those cities I have read poetry in,
yeah,
except for like the British Virgin Islands. That was just like a vacation when I was like early 20s or something.
yeah, yeah. I kind of the only time I'm ever not necessarily traveling for work are the times I go to visit my dad, maybe.
Of course. Yeah.
And but when I do that, I'm still looking for the open mics.
Always. I
Like,
call I call ahead, like,
still looking.
so what do you
Yeah,
guys have going on? In Puerto
yeah,
Rico, I
yeah,
mean, that's what I do all the time. Like I'll have a reading somewhere, or I'll know what show is going on. I go, okay, maybe I'll come. I'll go there. Things like that.
yeah, yeah. So
Um,
that's definitely it's definitely a poet's life that you described there. How old was your friend when they got the aneurysm?
Man, Wang was a prominent professor in New Eureka culture. His name was Wang Flores. He has a slew of books out. Wang was, I think, in his late 60s. I could verify that, but he
Mhm.
was in his late
Right.
60s. I had there was this Puerto Rican saxophone player who did a record. His name is Miguel Zinon, and he did a jazz record called "Identities Are Interchangeable." And what he did, he picked a few of us and interviewed us about our experience as New Yorkers, as what the migration would be like. And it was me, it was Juan Flores, it was Sonia Manzano from Sesame Street, um, you know. And when he got commissioned to do it, so when he first played it, he played it at a university, and I wasn't in town. And
Mhm.
then the second time he played it, he says, "We're playing it at Carnegie Hall. Do you want to come to the show?" I go, "Of course." So that was the last time I saw Wang, and we joked because he was like, "Hey, look at us! Like we're here at Carnegie Hall." I go, "I know, this is great,"
Yeah,
and
amazing.
and that was the last time I saw him. And it gets to a point that even in the situation that we're in now, right, with the pandemic and being home 90% of the time, um, I just urge people to call people that they may not have thought about talking to. Like I talk to my best friend sporadically, you know, every month or so, but like I see him maybe a few times a year, and I think those things sometimes you either change them or you're completely content with the way that is. But it's sometimes it can get to a point where our life gets it's not that the life gets in the way, but we get into this routine of, A to B to C, and then we'll go through that, and then the worst part is that sometimes the death is the thing that brings people together. People
Yeah.
you haven't seen in 5, 10 years, and it's like, okay, it's like, all right, I wish it was a better circumstances, right? That's always the thing you say, hey, we're here together, better circumstances, and it's like, you want those things to not necessarily be those circumstances.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think that I think in many ways that even though we can't see each other and talk to each other because of the technologies that are available, in many ways we have an opportunity actually more now because we are our lives, aspects of our lives have been forced to be put on pause. Like now is actually the perfect time. Like now is the perfect time to talk to that person you haven't talked to in years. Now's the time. Really.
I was just talking to a poet, a friend of mine, Anthony Morales, who lives in Maryland, and we were talking. He was talking about, like, now I can go to open mics because they're digital. He goes, sometimes we have to be honest about how our anxiety sometimes just doesn't let us go out. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really, especially for a performer, it's always a double-edged sword. And so Wang was like 70. He's either 70 or 71 when he passed
Yeah.
away. And those are things that I think um, put a shock in the system.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was actually just being on online. Kai Coogan, I think I'm saying her name right. Kai, she put her open mic on Facebook Live. Now I can watch an open mic in Little Rock that I would not have seen otherwise. So not
Yeah,
just as a performer, but as a viewer. I mean, this is
yeah.
it's really it's there's some cool things going on right now. So we can actually be excited about and
And that's the
interested in.
thing, though, is that these things have been around. I mean, they stream their readings all the time, and
Yeah,
you just, again, you let life get in the way of things that you would want to do. So here's the time for you to do all those things, or do nothing. It's completely fine.
but you see the poem that you said earlier. It's very interesting in the conversation we've been having afterwards about this idea of immediate death and about what you write about, like having lived and having done certain things and having left, things that you can leave behind now. Um, in a way, do you feel like the fact that you've written this book, it gives you a certain a feeling that you're gonna have a life beyond your life, and there's definite possibility of life beyond life that kind of gives you a sense of a sense of calm, even in the midst of a pandemic. Or is that just my morbid ass?
No, no, no. I think I think the biggest, like, my biggest thing is that when you watch, um, say, like a documentary. I saw a documentary last night on punk, and, like, I'm watching, like, Sylvain from New York Dolls, Harley from the Cro-Mags, and, like, Harley was like 9 years old when he went to CBGB's. And you think about that, and you're like, wow, that, like, he was there for the whole spectrum of what punk was, became, and ended up being. But then I think about, wow, okay, so I was in my, you know, late teens, and yet I rarely ever went to CB's. I performed at CB's before it closed, but I think the biggest, like, in terms of poet, no, I feel really comfortable with what I've done in life, even as a person, right? Like, I think I've traveled, I've checked off a lot of lists where I feel fully content with certain things. I think my biggest thing is more just being a musician. Like, there are certain things as a musician that I really want to accomplish for myself, just to be able to breathe a little easier. But as a poet, no, I feel, I mean, a Guggenheim would be really nice, a
Well, of
Pulitzer
course,
Prize, a Pulitzer Prize would be really nice.
of
Uh,
course, of course.
but no, no, I mean, but yeah, I am really grateful for everything that poetry has given me and the people I've met through the years. One to me when I read that poem, not the funniest, but the thing that sticks out is the fact that I've been to Calexico, which is the border town of California and Mexico. So one side is Calexico and the other one is Mexicali. I've been to that town like 3 times on the strength that I found out that a teacher was reading my work to his students. So I would just, I would call him up like, hey, I am in San Diego. Come and get me. Let's do some readings in this town that And then I said something once. I go, "Oh, have you guys ever met a Puerto Rican before?" They go, "Yeah, our math teacher's Puerto Rican." And then I find out that he was attached to the Puerto Rican political prisoners, where he would visit them in Southern California. So I thought it was really interesting in this random town that there was this connection that him and I had with politics and things to do with prisoners, because I've known a few in my day. And again, if I end up in Hamburg talking about living in the Bronx to a bunch of Germans, and they're like, "That was great," and I'm just like, "All right,
Yeah,
I'll take that, because again, if we don't tell our stories, I don't know who is,
yeah.
you know.
Well, it's interesting because the first time we met was actually at Tia Chucha's
Yeah.
when Louis Vuitton Resto was hosting
Mm-hmm. Shout out
the
to Louis.
open mic there. Yeah, shout out to Louis Vuitton. And so yeah, so the diaspora in many ways it's connected no matter where you move it, huh?
And it's the scene too, right? I think every scene has pros and cons, right? But I think the network that it is, like the network of, if you enjoy and respect writers' work, I think that it creates a good conversation throughout someone's lifespan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can you share another poem with us?
Sure. I'm gonna give you guys something. I'm gonna give like some newer work. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just give me 1 second. Well, while I'm looking for that, so I'm working. What I'm working on now, because this book that I read from Notes on the Return to the Island, this came out 3 years almost, right? Like 2.5 years, and I toured it for about 2 years, and I had a great time reading it to people, because I enjoy the book, um, because I didn't think I was gonna write a a book about Puerto Rico, say this early in my life. I thought I was gonna write the rock and roll book, like the rock and roll book, or the pop culture book, which is like one of the ones I'm working on now. But I thought I was gonna like do a hip hop rock and roll book much sooner than I did one about the diaspora, or the New Yorican experience. Um, so I thought, I was surprised with it, but that's also because I was traveling to Puerto Rico so much in a 4-year span, that now it just seems logical.
Yeah,
Now it just seems logical, and um, those things are, you have to be open to those things, right? So let's see. Okay, so I'm going to read this 2-part poem, and the first part is called "The Last Poem in March," and then the other one's called "The First Poem in April." And I just wrote those now, and this is, yeah, this is, like most of us are going to go into. This is these poems that we write in the middle of a pandemic, right?
yeah.
Okay. I got a new fedora in the mail. It's beige. I paint my face white and sing everything in my Bob Dylan mask voice. The Dylan voice that I have is thick, has a New York accent. When I paint my masterpiece, I'll burn it immediately so no one can see it. I can deny it ever existed, like playing in front of the mirror, half naked, half wet, and quarantined. My guitar is actually in tune. The ambulance provides a good intro. The silence in the apartment the last few weeks has become a new roommate, like the shadows that wake up with me. There is a patchwork of staring into space, thinking of revolting, out the blue, crying, laughing at my own jokes, cooking a meal I would never think about cooking, and wondering where my darling young son is. The only sounds are the feedback when I turn the amp on. It sounds like a Tuesday, like the last day of the month, like the longest day of the longest month in the longest season of the longest year. And surprise, surprise, tomorrow is a day for the fools. April.
When did you write this?
March 31st. There's a part two though. Hold on. There's part two. This is the So the first part is the last poem in March, and then this is the first poem in April, and they kind of mirror each other. Today is a day for the fools. The first day of a new month feels like the longest day of the longest month in the longest season of the longest year. My phone rings once a day, and it's still a collection agency looking for the money I don't have. The next few weeks feels like a pilot for a surrealist dark comedy with no jokes in it, like a Jodorowsky film, maybe a David Lynch too. I comb my hair out, and the handful of strands that come out that have been coming out since I was a teenager could be a life-size doll, maybe the twin I never had. Hopefully it'll like pizza and the Yankees. I washed my face paint off from last night. I put my Bonafide mask on. I sing my songs in my Bonafide voice and thick New York City accent. When I paint my disaster piece, it'll showcase it. I'll showcase it to remind me that there are lessons in failure that I'll never learn in success, like trying to breathe underwater, trying to fly, trying to cook. The meal was edible, and I'm okay with that outcome. Yet I almost drowned and broke my leg after the fall. So, unless something drastically changes in my physiology, I won't be trying those two things anytime soon. Like, I once put a fork in a socket and it lit my hand on fire. I haven't done those things again in over 25 years. The song in the background is The Logical Song by Supertramp. The thing is, I don't know what is logical anymore. And these days, self help, call it what you want. I've been doing this long before the world went crazy and lit itself on fire. I don't know why I would know they've lit themselves on fire before. Didn't the world learn? Didn't they know everything catches a flame? It ignites from a spark, especially when you move it around, trying to put it out. I can see everything from my window. An observation will tell you that today is indeed a day for the fools.
Damn. Damn.
So, 30-30, the 30-30 always provides a certain amount of influence and inspiration, but I also think it's like a necessary muscle memory. Um, I think I write the least after I finish books. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm never going to be able to write a book again. I don't know how I did that. And then you just have to push yourself out. The two things I'm working on now, though, are I'm working on this pop culture book. I've been heavily influenced by pop culture since I was a teenager,
Yeah.
and I'm writing a book on my parents who have both passed away. So it's a lot to be a 40-year-old orphan. You know what I mean? So those poems have been hard to get through,
Yeah.
um, especially like going combing it over and doing edits. Like the, there's a publisher in Puerto Rico who wants to put it out. I have to like text him every few months, like, sorry, I know this is taking longer than it should be, but it's not the easiest content to get through,
Yeah.
especially because I know, and we've spoken about this before. Like, you tour when you have a book, and I'm just like, I don't know if I want to tour this book of bereavement, of grief. I mean, I like some of the poems until the very end, and I'm like a big bawling mess on stage. So I'm still at this interesting cross of, all right, let me finish this book, and then it's like, let me finish it, but I don't know where I'm going with this. And but it's I've written so many poems about both of them. My mom was alive to see the last book, and I have a whole series of poems about her in it. Some were kind of dark because of her health, but I did have one that was really funny in there, so I thought it was really good for her, I think, to see those things, because sometimes we write about these things that we're clashing with, and sometimes they're our fathers, right? And I didn't want her to think that I'm only going to write about him, you know. So she did like the poem I wrote about my son. I thought it was funny. I like that one. I was like, all right.
That's beautiful. So you've been a writer of note, we'll say, for almost 20 years now, right?
Uh, I mean, that's amazing because I'm like 25, so I don't know how'd you do that. No,
Impressive.
yeah. It's been 20. Like, I started writing 17. I started performing at 18. So it's about 20, about 20. I say 20 because I think um, somewhere between like 22, because you take these dips of and hiatuses. Like, I definitely didn't write for 20. years straight. After my son was born, I stopped for a few years, um, because the things of like writing and going to open mics and going to venues, it drains you. You know, like
Yeah.
I always commend people who could do that for 10, 15 years. I can't always sit down and open mic anymore. Um, Not because I think that the content ain't good. I think the content is good, but it's a thing that I've absorbed so many words from so many writers that now I like to be quiet most of the time. And I know most people don't think that because they know I'm a loud ass, but the older I've gotten is the quieter I am in like public settings, or unless I'm heckling a person, and that's different. Like I just like if it's a friend of mine, then he's gonna get heckled because he knows that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's been about 20 years, and you know, it's ups and downs and everything,
Well,
and
I mean,
lessons.
that's a really impressive thing. Not just to have such a a great body of work, but also the ability to still produce after so many years. So what can you offer to our audiences, like kind of some of the secrets of your longevity?
Sure. Well, I had a mentor. His name is Tony Medina, and when I first met Tony, I was about 19, I think, and like I had a couple poems. You know, I was new on the scene. A couple of the older New York cats knew me because I was like around. I had a fro, so it was like really easy to spot me. And the few times that we hung out in the very beginning, um, he would tell me, you know, look at the people who like that. My relationship with poetry has nothing to do with anybody else. That my relationship with poetry, like your relationship with poetry, has nothing to do with anybody else. Has nothing to do with whatever is going on in the spectrum of what poetry is. Like your relationship with poetry is yours, but I knew that my relationship was a long term one, right? Like if I'm going to be a poet, like I'm going to be a poet until, you know, until I'm dead, and hopefully that's a long time from now. You know, like, you know, the when we think about some of the writers that we admire, you know, and I could pick a few, but when they pass away, then people talk about the volumes that they created, and yet we only talk about maybe like a book of theirs, and the longevity and is a big thing, um, because I'm a very different writer than I was at 25. You know, the style's still there, right? My personal like cadence and my style for certain things,
Of
because
course, yeah.
they're still there, but the subject matter is different, you know. And I think it's important to acknowledge the stuff you write for, but then be also excited about what you're going to write later. Um, you know, when Baraka passed away, um, I went to the funeral, and you know, it was a huge funeral in New Jersey. Like the line went around the corner. It was enormous. And the next day, when the obituaries came out, like they always mentioned, um, the story that he wrote. He got the OB for with the Flying Dutchman, I believe, right? The Flying Dutchman,
Like,
and like some really early work when he was still Leroy Jones. And then when you really observe his catalog, he has like 60 volumes of work.
yeah,
Like what? Like that's, you know, like it's like Ginsberg, but all you ever talk about is Howl, and it's like no man, just like if you love Neruda and you're only mentioning 20 love poems and a song of despair, I'm like you're missing out because there's so much work in between everything that that's what the whole point of writing poetry in different times of your life is to see how is this writer um, expanded. And I think at an early age, when I got really kind of focused into like, oh, you know, let me get published. Like I would talk to other people and they would say, oh, well, you know, I'm just holding on to the manuscript until like a big house picks it up. And I can understand that, but I didn't. The conversation of validation was very different in my head than it was with other people, because when you would look at some of the books that some of these writers that you admired put out in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s and 60s, I go, those houses don't exist anymore. And
Yeah.
they could look like a shitty chapbook, but it's something you still wanted. Like at the end of the day, it's like the those first few books that you put out, of course you want it to be the best book possible, but you might not like that work in 10, 15 years. Like when I look at my first book, when I look at Pablo Bueno, I'm like, half these poems don't need to be in here. And but that's not necessarily my job. My job is to write it and let the editor do all that work. Um, and I mean, I've thought about revamping the whole thing and re-releasing it. Um, you know, maybe.
Yeah.
But like with When the City Sleeps, my second book, like, I was really excited about that book, and still even that one, I go, I don't need this many poems or this size of a book. But it's all growth, right? It's all growth
Yeah.
as a personal artist, and um, you know, like I doubt that Garcia Lorca was really excited about the a newest version of Poet in New York, or the Neruda want Residence on Earth to be combined into one book, even though it was split into three different parts. Those things is like, again, put the work out, right? I just tell people just put the best work you have out, have someone who you think knows more than you, and have them look at things, and just be excited and stay excited. If you sell 5 books, if you sell 5,000, at the end of the day, the book is still there. The book is still there. Right? And congratulations on your book.
Oh, thank you.
I know you've been busy mailing them. I saw the photo in the post office. I was like, yeah, man.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I have my own personal stash. I'm actually out of my own personal stash, so it's gonna go back to my publisher. But I mean, the responsibility. I mean, it's on Amazon, but like I don't want to give Jeff Bezos any more money. So that's kind of like my attitude is like to avoid that. So, but I noticed. Speaking of publishers, I've noticed that you've gone with the same publisher for your last 3 outings.
Yeah.
Grand Concourse. So can you speak to tell us a little bit about the press, and also tell us why you stuck with Grand Concourse, and why that's like the press, or has been the press for you.
So, Grand Concourse is my press.
Oh,
Concourse is my press.
I didn't know that was the answer. I'm just,
No, I know. That's why I laughed, because when we had this conversation, I didn't say that because I was trying to give you like publisher answers, right?
Yeah.
But oh man, so I call this one of the origin stories. So in 2011, I had When the City Sleeps as a manuscript. I was really excited about it, because there was at least 5, 6 poems in there that I was really proud of, and it worked really well as a show. And I had this poem that was inspired by Ginsberg and how it was called Holla. It was a 15-page poem. It was enormous. Like I read it. I think I've read it maybe 3 times, and it's like 15, and I'm like exhausted. But it got published in a journal from LA called Palabras.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called Palabras up, and I talked to the publisher. She's an old Chicana poet who I think I forgot her name, which I know I could find if I Googled it. But they used to have readings at the Red Cat Lounge down in LA. So I called, and I was really thinking about, I wanted to go back to Cali to read. I was like, hey, do you have any gigs in any openings for slots for shows? And they were like, yeah, you have a book coming out. Huh? I was like, yes. And she's like, oh, what's the name of the book? I was like, When the City Sleeps. They were like, fantastic. Here's a date. And, like, I forgot what she said afterwards. She just let us know it was good. And I was like, fantastic, great. When I hung up the phone, I was like, what did I just do? I told her a book coming out. Like, I don't have a book coming out. So
Did you have a title for a book?
Yeah. I did.
Okay.
I did. When the City Sleeps
on the spot.
Yeah, When the City Sleeps. No, I've had like that was. I knew that was the title from like mid 2000s. Like that was the working title for it.
Okay.
So there was a fiction writer out here. His name is Charlie Vasquez. Big up, he's my dude. He was doing these anthologies based out of a open mic series he had. This queer open mic series in the city that he had, and I knew that he could put books together, right? I think the biggest thing about self-publishing, whatever you want to call it, micro-publishing, whatever the name is that you just want the best quality product,
Yeah.
and you want to make sure that it looks as legitimate as anyone else's book, right? Which is why
Right.
you have to be really hard on yourself, and you have to be meticulous. And sometimes people aren't, right?
No,
And you
people
can
are
see the
hard to
difference.
be themselves.
You can see the difference between When the City Sleeps
Yeah.
and No Son of Return to the Island,
Yeah.
where I completely uh, understood how these little things changed. But I also had conversations to myself like, do I want brown paper with a white cover, right? Like the little things that kind of like friends of mine who were art history majors, I
Mhm.
would run it by them. I go, how does this look in terms of this? And they go, well, it kind of clashes because it's not on the same color palette, things like that, right? Like a fake
Yeah.
stamp. Um, so Charlie and I went through it. We did the line, we did our line checks, and I probably went through like 7 proofs, but I flew out. I published the book January 1st of 2012, and because I knew it was going to take me about a week or two to get the books, and the gig in LA was on the 17th, so I flew out. So I did a blind approval. it
Yeah.
got it got because it was always like a centimeter off, and it was kind of annoying me. And I was like,
Yeah.
I can't keep waiting for a proof because I need this shit out now.
Yeah.
My friend who lived in LA got the books. He FaceTimed me, and I saw it. I was like, great, that looks fantastic. And the and of course this is a very different um like narrative for people who go through bigger houses. But the biggest thing was, and it's really interesting because if this was the band, if this was the Mona Passage, and I put out a record that looked as good as some of these books did, people would be like, oh, they would applaud you. But the
Yeah.
conversation of self-publishing versus a big house publishing is such a weird, convoluted one because I go, well, why do I need someone to validate the work that I have if
Right.
10 of these poems have been published somewhere else? Or I believe enough in my work and I believe enough in my work ethic, or the people who've looked at this book and ripped it apart. Louis Vette actually, I met Louis Vette right around, like I met her when we were younger, and then like we reconnected around that time. When I gave her a copy of, it was either When the City Sleeps, I'm pretty sure it was that one. She edited it for me again, and I appreciated that because the kind of people you want to give you feedback on your projects are people that you want to have a drink with, but you respect them enough to like listen to what they got to say. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a lot of people look at the book, but what
Yeah.
it was before Grand Concourse Press, everyone gave me an answer that was kind of blasé. One
Yeah.
one person said, who had a small press, they're like, hey, we could publish you, but it won't be till 2013.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I just couldn't wrap my head on why it would take this long. If there's, I mean, granted, if you have a roster and there's a people in front of you, I guess I can guess that, but I was like, no, I can do it myself. And literally 2012 was, I performed 3, 4, about 5 months out that year because the summer's always slow. But I went from LA. I did a huge tour in LA, in California, the Midwest. The Midwest was actually 2013, but I did East Coast for a minute, and I went to Europe. I went to Europe later that year when Hurricane Sandy hit New York. I was actually on tour, so I
Wow.
thought it was a good time. And because I still had like a job, like I still had like a regular job, and my job was like, hey, let us know when you gotta take your tour, and I was like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so with every book that comes out, I definitely am more um, critical about how the book looks. And I mean, out of all the books, I do think that Notes looks the best one. Like, it has the best paper, the design. Because fonts, you have this relationship with. I have a relationship with fonts. If on the cover of When the City Sleeps, I'm using that very popular Mesquita font that looks like an old Western thing. But the only reason why I used it on the book is because I used it for everything that year. So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna stay by you because I'm kind of loyal. Yeah, by the next book, I was like, no, I'm okay. I don't want to use it anymore. So you have to, like, there has to be a formula, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're gonna use this font on the cover, you have to use it one more time inside, and then everything else has to be a certain uniform. And My favorite advice that Charlie ever gave me was like, well, look at some of your favorite writers. What font are they using? Most people use Garamond or Palatino or these like really nice serif based fonts, but you have to. It has to look like someone who put this book together knew exactly what they're doing. They're not just like, oh well, this looks fine. No, no, you have to.
Whatever you do, it has to look like it was on purpose.
It has to be material. No, and
In
everything.
life, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
like
dancing, you gotta like do it all, whatever you're doing. It's got
yeah,
yeah,
you have to. It's not like because it's like a painting. The painting is what it is,
yeah.
but the process behind it is what the real story is.
Mhm.
Right? If you have an all black painting and a white dot, we want to know why that white dot exists there. And if you just say, I thought it looked nice, that's not the story we're looking for. We're looking
Yeah.
for I went through 19 layers of black and this piece kept coming out, and you're like that's what you're like, what? How's that? I go, I don't know. Like this is
Yeah, yeah,
divine thing from above. But those things, like and it's been a journey. So like now with the new book with a publisher coming at me saying we want to put this book out, um, my um, my my current like status is like, okay, let me not be overbearing and getting to go into a back and forth with a publisher who wants to, like I've seen the books that his press put out, and I do like the way they put together. But I'm going to say, well, how about we use this? How about we use this? But
yeah.
sometimes it's okay to let someone else do the work.
Someone else do the work. Yeah, yeah. As long as
Necessarily have, boy, trust me when I say that sometimes I put too much on my plate because sometimes it's not that. Sometimes people fail you, and it creates this narrative in your life that you have to do everything on your own, and it takes away from the the beauty of just being the artist, like the post the post 2000 like lifestyle of a performing poet was you get in your car and you drive around and that's completely fine. If people want to do that, that's completely fine. Not everybody can do that, but or that everything had to be run like a business. Like no, just take your time, just be a writer. Like if I get hired to do something, I'm just going to be a writer. I'm not going to be here to tell you how to run your show. But at the same token, I'm not going to get upset if there's 5 people or 500 people. They're going to get this. They're going to get the same intensity they always going to get because those 5 people deserve the same as the 500 people.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, it's interesting. A lot of what you're saying, a lot of it really speaks to the way I look at things about this question. You said it several times, come up this question of validation, and I kind of feel like if you have your own style, right, and then that style becomes like a discipline, and that discipline becomes a standard of excellence that is your own. Like your excellence is based upon stylistic choices that you yourself understand why they are there. Then there's really only the people you can only really receive advice from are people who know what you're attempting to do,
Yeah,
right? I mean, they could be like the most prestigious person in the world, but if they don't really know what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it, it really doesn't matter what their opinion isn't any more valid than anyone else's. I mean, it's only people who understand what it is that you are trying to accomplish that can tell you whether or not you did it or whether or not,
and success looks different for everybody.
Mhm.
Success looks very different for everybody. Um, I had, like I've been in communication with poets since I was 19. So like when I talk to people who are younger than me, and I see I see what they're talking about in terms of the path that they've chosen, and it sounds eerily familiar to what I did. Right, I didn't finish college. I went hard to perform. I just got regular jobs, and I became a teaching artist really fast when I learned I can actually teach people how to do this. Um, but then like I would hear them say, "Nah, I don't want to put a book out. I'm gonna wait for someone else to put it out for me." Um, I forget that I had someone do that for me. Um, in my mid 20s, one of my basic compatriots, I guess you can call them, right? My comrades, my boy Shaggy Flores, who lives in DC now, he had a small indie press where I think his narrative would be the same thing. He knew no one was checking for him because he wasn't in New York and he wasn't in Boston. He was like in the middle, So he goes, I'm just going to create it for myself. And again, if this is a different genre of art, we will be more applauded, right? If we are in a punk band or a rock band, and here's this really nice design CD that we did ourselves, everyone goes, "Wow, that's really good." But again, the narrative of like, "Oh, well, this person put you out," but I go, "What are the levels when in terms of like what is acceptable, right? If I am a step below a bigger house and I still have the same contacts, like if my contacts are still better than my publishers, right? Like what we're doing here is trying to expand our market and use it to further express ourselves. If I have more contacts than anyone in my network, which I don't, but I'm saying like if it's a conversation between me and the publisher and they have no clue what they're talking about, well, why I'm gonna cut the middleman out.
Yeah.
I become the middleman, right? And so now when I have these conversations with poets who say that they have these books out, and the first thing they complain about is like the lack of accessibility they have for their books, I
Yeah.
go, I don't have that. If I know I have a gig on the 20th, I'm going to order everything on the 5th or the 10th, and I get it on time. I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
never had an issue. I've had an issue once, I think, trying to get books, and I don't know what was going on, but um, and so when we talk about validation, when Shaggy published my book, he put his own money in, but of course he became like the executive producer. So he goes, "Well, this is the cover I want for the book," and I wasn't going to argue with him. Like I had a title in mind, but I understood why he chose Pelo Bueno. But then the subtitle of "A Day in the Life of a New Weekend Poet" was kind of an homage to my previous chapbooks. Um, like if someone who theoretically is your peer is going to put this kind of money into you, you don't fight that. I'm always appreciative of that, and I think that took that chip that we have, that validation chip off my shoulder for a bit. So when I approached myself to do Grand Concourse Press, I didn't have any fear of it. I know my work ethic better than anyone else does, right? Because that's what some of the other publishers told me. They would tell you, poets, they don't know how to hustle, and I was like, I don't know. I think poets hustle a lot harder than fiction writers do because we have a whole network. Fiction
Yeah.
writers can't really go on tour. They either get booked by somebody at a library and try. No, poets will be in the same town for a week with 3 different venues, and just and so but I think a lot of it also came from when Palabras published Holler, because Holler was like a 7-year-old poem that no one ever wanted to hear me read. I'm like, hey, here's this long poem that sounds like a Puerto Rican dude doing Ginsberg. That's fine, because that's what it was.
Mhm.
And when they published it, I was like, oh, well, if that can get published, I can do this myself.
Right.
Of course, there's things you learn, like, and even before that, when we had Pelo Bueno, that was still at the point um, where bookstores will basically strong arm you to get your book in the thing. They will want it at half the cost of the book. Like you might get, and money from a book in a store is not, that's not what you're trying to do. You're just trying to have your book on the shelf so that people see it and then follow you in some other shape or form of support. But bookstores want to have you get $2 for your book and they sell it for $15. Like,
Right.
so I already also had like my own network, especially in New York, of
Mhm.
independent bookstores that I knew would carry the books.
Yeah.
And that became a whole nother thing. Um, so I do have a few people always call me and they go, "Hey, I have an offer from, let's pick someone random like Arte Público. I got a book offer from them, but I'm thinking about going independent." So I'm really upfront with people. I go, "Okay, here are the pros and cons. How hard are you going to work for this book? Are
Mhm.
you ready to block out 6 months of your whole year after the book comes out to put the legwork in?" Because one of the things that a bigger house is going to have is they're going to have more connections, more
More
male,
legs.
females. Yeah, more connections, right?
Yeah.
So I always tell people this, and I hope people are listening and watching, that yeah, if a house is offering to publish a book, do it. Do it, because you need to see how both sides work, right? Because then when you do put another book out, then you can use that same context, right? You can go back in the same network, saying, "Oh, hey, I was I was at UT Austin. I was at UC San Diego. Like just you send those same emails out. Might be the same exact network, and then it creates like, I went to California every from 2012 to 2014. I was there every 3 months, either Northern or Southern California, because I really had a nice time with just being there. First of all, January in California is very different than January in New York, and it's like, ah, I don't have a gig for 2 weeks. It's fine. I'm just gonna walk around LA and just get a tan,
No competition, yeah.
go to the open mics and just relax. And I think we put so much pressure on ourselves in terms of touring that even with the band, I do that. Like I don't necessarily need to go into a city and get out of there. And that's happened specifically. That happens a lot with like Sacramento because I'm always in the Bay Area. Like I'll go and do a show and leave. But no, sometimes give the city a few days, walk around, like, and that's how you build camaraderie. You build community in these cities that won't ever see you more than once a year, probably. You know, and some of the best shows come out of that. But a lot of it takes planning. Again, the same meticulous nature that you put into the book is what you have to put into your tour. Like where are you going to fly from first? Are you going to go back and forth crisscross? Are you going to fly in, stay somewhere, fly back, and then take train? And I would tell people, especially in terms of touring, I like to be alone because I can basically suffer through anything. But if you go on tour with other people, and then it's like
you have to suffer them, yeah.
Well, it's not that. It's like, man, look, I told someone this once. I was like, look, if I'm on tour and say, my Airbnb cancels on me, and this is before Airbnb, right? We'll just use that as an example. Then I have to figure out what I need to do immediately to at least find somewhere I could lay my head down. That's either a phone call to someone who's a friend of mine or a friend of a friend, and that also might mean just the floor, right? And it's not glamorous, and it's again, but I don't want to do it to other people if we're on tour. And so, since I don't drive, it's not like I can sleep in my car. If I drove, it would have been over. I would have been on tour constantly because you just drive to wherever you want to go. But I think those things are, and that's why I relate to a very DIY like punk network to like the way the poetry scene is, because you are going to go from town to town. Things aren't going to work out, right? If your pay for whatever gig is based on who shows up and no one shows up, you take the L and keep it moving. But to me, it builds character. Like I know that for a fact. I know poets who've made six figures touring, and sometimes they want to, say, well, I'm really tired of this, and I'm like, no, I don't think I'm ever gonna. Like, I would literally have to be on the road 250 days out the year to be tired of touring.
Yeah.
Then you get tired of hotels, and that's fine. But it's like, because then when you get home, then you can do whatever you want to do. And I freelanced or not had a job for about 5 years out of the 7 years that I started touring, from When the City Sleeps to Notes on a Return. And that's 3 different books in there. And, like if everything clicks and everything's planned correctly, it's a really nice time. Yeah.
So, any final words or things to promote to our audience?
Sure. Always, because it's such
a work. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not. It's not the work. So I have a band, right? And having a band, having one career that is fully established the way I am as a poet, and having this other thing that is very different to what I do as a poet, sometimes always gets killed on the wayside. So I have a band called The Mona Passage, right? It's TheMonaPassage, and this has been such a labor of love, because I've had people come up to me and go, I love your poetry, I don't really like your band. And it's like,
straight up.
Yeah, and it's like, I appreciate your honesty, but I'm just like, I've never had someone do it different. Like, oh, I love the band, I hate you. And it's like, what? So, I mean, there are times where I sacrificed big shows just to do music. And I don't know how smart that was. Like, I remember I did, do you know Jamie Kennedy?
The poet.
Yeah.
The poet or the comedian?
No, the poet.
Yeah,
You
with
know, so
Jimmy the
Jamie
Wolf,
had
right?
the Tourette's without regrets.
It's Rest Without Regrets. Yeah, yeah.
So I got booked, and it was a you know, I mean, Tourette's is a huge show. So I
Mhm.
tell Jamie, I go, I want to play guitar. He was like, I, you know, Bonafide, whatever you want to do. And to this day, I'm like, what was I thinking? I should have just did some goddamn poetry, did really well, and then come back next week for like an open mic and do some. Yeah, I did a cover of Dylan,
Mhm.
Bowie, and I did a Hendrix song, but I did Hey Joe, but I rechanged and called it Pedro. And it was like Pedro killed his landlord. I'm pretty sure that's what I did.
Oh, okay, all right.
I have one of my guys in the Bay Area, my boy Ying's son. He played with me, and yeah, it was Dylan was I think it was Not Dark Yet, and
That's a great one.
Bowie was Bowie has this cover of a Scott Walker song that I did called My Death. And that one's really good. But of course, everyone's looking at me like, what the fuck are you doing? And,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes you just, you know, but this is like, shit, what year is this? I don't know if this is like this century, like this decade or the decade before, but maybe 2005, maybe 2006. I don't know. But yeah, it was like in '05. And I was like, what was I thinking? Like, you know, so but the band is such a labor of love. So by the time this is all over, um, the record comes out in a couple of months.
Okay.
We have the first single coming out. It's called "Dance of a Nuclear Bomb," and you know we're excited about it. And you know when the pandemic hit, we're like, oh, okay. So we just have to wait for this to finish so we can finish the final mixing. And you know, by the summertime, we're excited about it.
Let me know if you do like a listening party or something like that, and I'll share it.
That'd be great. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but like we're gonna have a video. Like we're gonna have a video. Like everything is there. We're just like, nah, if we can go outside, that'd be great.
Well, let me know when the promo starts,
Yeah,
and we'll figure it
exactly,
out.
exactly. Otherwise, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I mean, just doing these interviews actually is at first I set up a whole thing for myself, a really tight regimen of constantly writing. I said the only thing I can control is my own production. So I said like an hour for this, an hour for this, an hour for this, an hour for that, an hour for that. And so I was working on the next two manuscripts, and I was working really, really hard on that. And then that kind of eventually created a situation where I was beginning to stress myself out, saying I don't have time. I don't have time to do all the things I want to do. You know, like, and I'm
It's like,
yeah, exactly. And so then I kind of shifted into doing more of these interviews with people and having them promote their own work and talking about other people and talking to people about themselves as opposed to just me constantly thinking about myself and everything, all my projects, which was developing some weird narcissism is the wrong word, but this weird like self-flagellation and self like like whatever, and it's just this getting really like dictatorial with myself, just smashing myself with an iron fist, kind of attitude.
yeah,
It's getting really extreme. So I'm glad to be doing this, but probably in a week or two I'm gonna stop doing interviews and go back to beating myself up.
you have to.
I'm like, switching it out depending how long this all lasts.
I mean, I literally just spoke to um, a friend of mine from Boston named Cliff Notes,
Mhm.
and he said it too. He was like, I can't. There's no way I can do music every hour when I'm like in this like self exile, like isolation. I go because that becomes unhealthy because then you're gonna start not liking it.
Yeah.
And like you're gonna create and like I haven't like I practice my guitar and I do my writing, but like if I wanted to like start writing more demos, I was like no, like I still have another 60 demos that I can go back to if I wanted to, um, and it's like the the gentleness you need to have with yourself in these times when it comes to producing something, right? Because if I've written 4 books and I've written those in regular times and having jobs and having a regular work schedule, like yeah, you would think that well I'm just gonna write the great American novel right now, and it's like no, like I just want to kind of just relax, not take for granted that I am not exhausted like I was before this all happened. And if when the writing comes, the writing comes. The writing comes, the writing comes. Like it's, you know, like well, we're not planning to go anywhere. So, but I bet you if you go into your hard drive, You go into your documents, well, there's like 400 poems there, and you're like, none of these are good. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Right? And that like, our self critique is always going to be the worst than anybody else's.
Yeah.
You know. But yeah, no, I hope you go back to the manuscript. I definitely have to go back to the manuscript, and you know, before everything goes right back to point A, and then we complain about not having too much time. Because
Yeah.
it's like, you know, they say, oh, it's not that you have time, it's discipline, but it's not, because this kind of freedom that we have now is also, it's a forced freedom. So it's not like me staying home on a Friday night to learn a bunch of songs, or me staying home on a Friday night because we can't go outside because we're recommended to stay here. So I think there's a different mindset on how we want to approach those things too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll have to do this again, and
Yeah.
and we'll talk about the music next time.
Yeah, definitely. I'll put a hat on. Hey, everybody. This is Bonafide's brother. I'm the musician, man. Yeah, Bonafide Red. He's the Rojas kid. I play music. I play rock and roll. They were like,
get some glasses too, and like a mustache with the.
no. Do I have my glasses over here? No. I just love like, I'm like, hey, everybody. You don't even know who I am. Look at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Matt, you be careful and you be safe and stay out of trouble. I know you like, causing fires.
Yeah, well, the Rebel Rousing's just online right now, so.
Everyone loves that.
Yeah.
But yeah, good luck and thank you. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you too. Thank you. Talk soon.
Have a good night, folks.